Like that of medieval warfare, both combatants in chess are to have an equal-sized army, with each component having the same rule set. That way, both sides know what to expect from the other side, with the fight itself being a knockout, drag-out slugfest with only one side remain standing. So with that said, let's get this bloodbath going. Greetings and welcome back to Checkpoint Gaming, Chess. With this episode, we will be going over the basic rules of the game. With chess, it is an abstract strategy wargame that is played between that of two opponents, with each player taking turns moving their pieces upon a square game board that is known as a chessboard, with the objective of each player being to put the king of the opposing player under attack in such a manner where the opponent's king will have no legal moves to perform. The player who has managed to achieve this has checkmated their opponent's king, thus causing them to win the game with the checkmated player losing the game. It is worth noting that leaving one's king open to be taken the next turn, moving one's king so that it can be attacked next turn, and even capturing the opponent's king are all forbidden from occurring. In determining who will go first, it is the player who possesses the light-colored pieces, followed by the next move being performed by the player that possesses the dark-colored pieces, with play alternating between the players in this manner until a winner has been determined. Each player will possess a move when their opponent has finished performing theirs. If neither player is able to position their pieces so that they can checkmate their opponent's king, then the game is deemed to be a draw. With the nature of the chessboard, it consists of an 8x8 grid with a total of 64 equally sized squares that alternate between light and dark. Regarding the light-colored pieces and squares, they're typically that of white, while the dark-colored pieces and squares are typically that of black. But with that said, other colors are able to be used instead as long as the players are able to differentiate between the pieces and squares. Regarding the 8 vertical columns of the board, they're known as files, while the 8 horizontal rows are known as ranks. Very militaristic, since the columns and rows of a military formation are known as rank and file. We can see the connection between that of chess and military thinking. When it comes to a straight line of squares that consists of the same color and runs from one edge of the board to that of an adjacent edge is known as a diagonal. When this line runs from one corner of the board to the other, they're known as the long diagonals. When placing the chessboard upon the play area, the right corner of the board as the players face it is to be that of the light-colored square. In regards to the game pieces, there are 32 total pieces that are divided in half, with 16 light-colored pieces and 16 dark-colored pieces, with each player taking their respective set of pieces before play begins. With each of these sets, they consist of 1 king, 1 queen, 2 bishops, 2 knights, 2 rooks, and 8 pawns. With the king, it is tall with a crown found on its top. With the queen, it is shorter than the king and has a different crown found on its top. With the bishop, it is slightly shorter than the queen with a Catholic mitre atop of it. With the knight, it is slightly shorter than the bishop, and it consists of a horse's head. Maybe some celestial entities are playing a game of cosmic chess due to the existence of the Horsehead Nebula. With the rook, it is shorter than the knight and resembles that of a castle tower. And with the pawn, it is the shortest piece of them all, is conical in shape, and is topped with a sphere. With the initial positioning of each piece upon the board, it consists of the following. On the near row of each player, each rook is found upon the far square, the knights are on the adjacent squares, the bishops are on the squares next to them, and the king and queen upon the center 2 squares with the king found upon its respective color. With the pawns, they're found upon the second nearest row to the player, with 1 pawn found within each square. When moving pieces across the board, it is when a player transfers one of their pieces from one square to that of another. With that said, players are not allowed to move one of their pieces into a square that is occupied by one of their own pieces. But if it moves into a square that is occupied by an opponent's piece, then the latter piece has been captured and removed from the board. All of this is considered to be part of the same move. And if a piece is able to be captured by an opponent's piece in said square, then said piece is considered to attack the opponent's piece, and a piece is considered to be attacking a square even if said piece is prevented from moving to said square due to it having to protect its own king that is under attack. When it comes to moving the pieces upon the board, each piece has a different means of engaging in this behavior. With the king, 2 means of moving are available to it. First is to move a single square into any adjacent square that isn't occupied and isn't under attack by one or more pieces of the opposing player. And second, it is to engage in castling. With castling, it is when the king and either rook of the same color are moved along the respective player's first rank and counts as a single move of the king. When engaging in castling, it is done in the following manner. The king is moved from its original square 2 spaces towards the selected rook, followed by having said rook moved to the square that the king has just crossed. So think of the rook as moving to the far side of the king from its original position. However, if the selected rook has already moved, then the player is unable to castle on that side, while if the king has already moved, the player will be unable to castle at all. With that said, the act of castling can be temporarily prevented from occurring if one of the following occurs. First, the square that the king is found in, the square that it is to cross during its movement, or the square that it is to occupy are under attack by one or more of the opponent's pieces. And second, if there is any piece that is located between the king and the rook that is to be affected by the castling process. So basically, a clear path is needed to castle. With all of that said, if a player wishes to engage in castling and they touch the rook first, then castling isn't allowed to be performed and causes said rook to engage in a non-castling maneuver. So remember the pecking order when in court. King first. A king is said to be in check when it is under attack by one or more pieces that belong to the opposing player. This is true even if the attacking pieces are unable to move due to them preventing their own king from being in check. No piece is allowed to be moved so that it would either leave their king exposed to check or to have their king be left in check. With the queen, it is able to move to any desired number of squares that are found along the rank, file, or diagonal from the square it is currently located. With the bishop, it is able to move to any desired number of squares that is found along the diagonal from the square that it is currently located, where one bishop is always found upon the light-colored squares and the other is found upon the dark-colored squares. With the knight, it is able to move 2 squares along the same rank or file, followed by 1 square over which will create a right angle, causing this movement to resemble that of an L-shaped pattern. And this formula can be that of 2 then 1 or 1 and then 2. It just depends upon what the player wants along with what is available. It is worth noting that the knight is the only piece that is unable to be blocked by another piece. So if another piece is found in the knight's way, it'll just jump over it. With all of the other pieces, they don't have this ability, so they can't move past a piece that is found in its way. Let's just hope that the knight doesn't kick any other piece in the head while it is engaging in this jumping maneuver. With the rook, it is able to move to any desired number of squares that is found along the rank or file from the square that it is currently located. When it comes to that of the pawn, it has a few movement options that are available to it. First, it is able to move forward 1 square to an unoccupied square found immediately in front of it. Second, during its first move of the game, it is able to move 1 forward as just described, or it can move 2 squares forward provided that the square is unoccupied. And third, it is able to move 1 square forward along the diagonal if said square is occupied by an opposing piece, thus capturing said opposing piece. With that said, it can never capture when moving straight forward. It can only capture along the diagonal. When a pawn advances 2 squares as its initial movement, and an opponent's pawn is positioned in a square that is of the same rank and in an adjacent file, the opponent's pawn will be able to be captured as though the initial pawn moved a single square. With that said, this capture is only legal during the move that follows the advanced pawn's double move and is known as an en passant capture. With that said, en passant can only occur when a pawn performs this double step. Afterwards, the pawn is incapable of engaging in en passant. Over the course of the game, if a player manages to move one of their pawns to the rank that is found furthest from its starting position, then the player will be able to exchange said pawn for a new queen, bishop, knight, or rook of their own color. This counts as part of the same move, and this new piece is to be placed onto the square that saw the arrival of said pawn. This square is known as the square of promotion, with exchange itself being known as a promotion. Now, if it was only that easy to get promoted at work in real life, and it is worth noting that what piece the player chooses is not restricted to the pieces that have already been captured. So if the player wants to have the pawn become a queen, and their queen is still on the board, they still get to promote the pawn to a queen if they so choose, thus giving them 2 queens on the board. With that said, hypothetically speaking, it is possible for a player to have a total of 9 queens upon the board at once, although we feel like such a situation is a mathematical impossibility. And unlike Han Solo, we would like to be told the odds. On top of this, the effect of the new piece after the promotion is immediate. But if the desired piece isn't immediately available to replace the promoted pawn, then the player is allowed to locate a spare piece and place it onto the board. If playing with chess clocks, the player is allowed to stop both of them in order to locate said piece. and if it can't be found quickly, then the player can ask for assistance from the arbiter if playing in a tournament. But if a suitable piece isn't able to be found, then an upside-down rook is able to be used as the replacement piece. And if a player's pawn is still found upon the last rank, it is improper for the player to press the clock in order to start the opponent's time. If this is done, then the opponent can immediately restart the offending player's clock without making a move. Only when the new piece has been placed onto the board can either player restart the clock. When it comes to that of promoting a pawn, there is no penalty for touching a piece that is found off of the board. If they touch a piece that is located off of the board, they're not obligated to use it when it comes to promoting the pawn. It is only when said piece touches the promotion square that it becomes an official promotion. For a move to be considered legal, it will have to meet all of the requirements that have been addressed earlier in this episode. But if it fails to meet all of the requirements, then the move is considered to be illegal. In addition to this, a position is considered to be illegal when it is unable to be reached by any series of legal moves. When it comes to that of moving a piece, a player is only allowed to use one hand to do so, and only the player who possesses the move is allowed to move or adjust their pieces upon their squares, provided that said player states their given intention. Any other physical contact that is made with a piece is considered to be intentional contact, excluding physical contact that is clearly accidental. Except for what was just touched upon, no pun intended, when the player who possesses the move makes physical contact with the chessboard and has the intention of either moving or capturing, and said player touches one or more of their given pieces, they will have to move the first piece that was touched that has the capability of being moved. And if one or more of the opponent's pieces are touched, said player will have to capture the first piece that is touched that is able to be captured. If one or more pieces of both colors are touched, the player will have to capture the first touched piece that belongs to their opponent with their own piece that they touched. But if doing so constitutes as an illegal action, then the player will have to move or capture the first piece that they touched that is able to be moved or captured. But if it is unclear which piece the player touched first, either theirs or their opponent's, then the player is considered to have touched their piece first before they have touched their opponent's piece. So just be careful when it comes to touching the board and the respective pieces. When a player whose turn it is touches both their king and rook, they will have to engage in castling upon the side that it is legal for them to do so. But if the player touches one of their rooks, followed by touching their king, but they're not allowed to castle on that given side during that move, then the situation is to be dealt with using the rules that were previously addressed. If the player wishes to castle and touches their king, followed by one of their rooks, but castling with said rook constitutes as an illegal action, then the player will have to make another move using their king that is legal for them to do. But if there aren't any legal moves for the king to perform, then the player is allowed to make any other move that is legal for them to perform. When it comes to that of promoting a pawn, the choice of the piece is considered to be finalized when said piece touches the square that saw the promotion occur. With all of this being said, if none of the pieces that a player touches are able to be legally moved or captured, then the player performing the move will be allowed to perform a move that is legal for them to engage in. With the act of promotion, it can be done in a number of different ways. First, the pawn doesn't have to be placed onto the square of a rival. Second, when moving the pawn and placing a new piece onto the square of promotion, it can occur in any order the player desires. And third, if a piece that belongs to an opponent is found in the square of promotion, then it is able to be captured. When a move is made, is part of a legal move, and it is released upon a square, then it cannot be moved again during that given turn. For a move to be considered made, it will have to be done under one of the following conditions. First is with a capture where the captured piece has been removed from the chessboard and the player who performed the capture places their own piece into its new square and has released the capturing piece from their hand. Second is with castling, where the player's hand is removed from the rook after it has crossed the king. Even though the player has released their given king from their hand, the move is yet to be made. But with that said, the player has no other choice but to perform castling, assuming that it is legal for the player to perform this move. If castling is illegal to be done on that given side, then the player will have to make another move with their king that is legal for them to perform, including castling with the other rook. But if there aren't any legal moves for the king to perform, then the player is free to make any legal move using any of their other pieces. And third is the promotion, which is performed with a pawn. This occurs when one of the player's pawns has reached a square of promotion, has been removed from the board, and the new piece has been placed into the square of promotion and has been released. Even though the player has removed their hand from the pawn after it has reached the square of promotion, the move is not considered to have been made. But with that said, the player is no longer able to place this given pawn into any other square. The move is only considered to be legal once all of the relevant requirements have been met. But if the move is considered to be illegal, then another move is to be made instead. A player will forfeit their right to claim a violation against their opponent once said player touches one of their pieces with the intention of either moving or capturing. And if one of the players is physically unable to move one of their pieces, then an assistant may be provided by said player to perform this action for them. But with that said, the assistant will have to be acceptable by an arbiter if playing in a tournament. In order for a player to win any given game, then they'll have to put their opponent's king into checkmate. This will cause the game to be immediately ended, provided that the move that is to put the opposing king into checkmate is a legal move. The game also comes to an end, and a player deemed the winner if the opposing player decides to resign. But if either player's king is unable to be checkmated by any possible series of legal moves, then the game will result in a draw. If a draw game occurs where a player that is to move has no legal moves, they're unable to check their opponent's king, and their king isn't in checkmate, it causes the game to be declared as a stalemate and results in an immediate end to the game provided that the stalemating move is a legal move. With that said, not all games that end in a draw count as stalemates. When it comes to that of a stalemate, the players are obligated to press or stalk the chess clock due to the stalemate taking precedence over the subsequent flag fall. But with that said, the player that delivers the stalemate can choose to press the clock as a means of minimizing the possibility of disputes from occurring. If a player claims a win when it comes to that of time before their opponent releases their piece that would cause a stalemate to occur, then the time forfeit claim is appropriate. But if it is unclear what came first, either that of the stalemate or a flag call, and the arbiter is unable to determine which came first based upon the evidence and testimony of both players and any witnesses to the situation, then the arbiter is to uphold the stalemate and dismiss the time claim. The game ends in a draw if a position arises where neither player is able to checkmate their opponent's king in any series of legal moves, causing the game to end up in a dead position. If this occurs, then the game comes to an immediate end. The game can also end in a draw if both players agree to a draw during the game, provided that both players have made at least one move upon the board. Once agreeing to a draw, the game will immediately end. The game can be declared a draw if any identical position is found upon the board, or it is about to appear, at least 3 times during the game. The game can also be deemed a draw if each player has made a minimum of 50 consecutive moves without the movement of any of their pawns or without performing any capture. Unless making a draw claim, which is an implicit draw offer, then the player should make a draw proposal after performing a move, but before they press down upon their given clock, which the opponent can either accept or reject. With the rejection of the offer, it can be done either orally or by deliberately touching a piece. Between the time the offer was made and the opponent decides what they wish to do, the player that made the offer is unable to withdraw it. It is possible for a player to make a draw offer while the opponent's clock is running, with the opponent having the option of either accepting or rejecting the draw offer. But if a player makes a draw offer in this manner, they can receive a warning or to be penalized for annoying their opponent. On top of this, if a player repeatedly makes a draw offer, it can be seen as annoying their opponent, resulting in said player to be penalized, which is done at the discretion of the arbiter. If the draw offer was rejected, then the offering player should either wait for their opponent to make a draw offer or the situation upon the board has changed significantly. If the players find themselves in a sudden death situation, then the game ends in a draw if both flags fall and either player points this situation out to the other. But if a player claims a win on time while their flag is still up but fails to stop their clock in time to prevent the flag from falling, then the game is considered to be a draw, unless the flag fall was observed by the arbiter or an independent witness. In sudden death situations, and a player points out that both flags have fallen before a checkmate occurs, then the game is to end in a draw. But if it's unclear what came first, either that of the checkmate or both flags fall, and the arbiter is unable to determine which came first based upon the evidence and testimony of both players and any witnesses to the situation, then the arbiter is to uphold the checkmate and dismiss the time claim. But in tournament situations where the arbiter wants to avoid any delays to said tournament from occurring, then the arbiter is able to call a game a draw. If a game is in a sudden death situation, both flags have fallen, and both players are unaware of the flags having fallen, This is the exception to the rule when it comes to making a call about the flags being down only being made by the players. It is worth noting that with all draw claims, they also count as draw offers, which is implicitly made to the opponent. And if the opponent accepts the implied draw offer, then the game comes to an end. With that said, the opponent is allowed to ask the arbiter to make a ruling upon the matter. If the arbiter upholds the claim, then the game comes to an end. But if the arbiter doesn't uphold the claim, then the game is to continue although the implied draw offer is still in effect, thus allowing the opponent to either accept or reject the offer. So with that said, that is what you need to know about the basic rules of chess. With that taken care of, we can start talking about competitive rules. If you liked this episode, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to stay up to date on any future episodes we upload, go ahead and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/checkpointgaming. See you in the next episode, and happy gaming.